day or good evening or at whatever time you decided to open this video, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about a rather small and obscure bloodline that has been renamed since it was known by this name. So that's not the name that they're going by now, but that is the name that they started going by originally, and it is the bloodline of Impundulu, and it is a bloodline that's exclusive to Africa. Why are we even talking about them? Well, because of a very tiny blurb on Wikipedia that goes, we don't know if Impundulu were aware of the new founding of Clan Hekata, therefore, we don't know if they participated in it. Ah, great. Just gonna casually talk about an African bloodline because we don't know whether they knew that all necromancers are becoming one clan through like an agreement and stuff. But the series are named about the necromantic bloodlines. You know, Mirta is desperately scrolling through her notes right now. Yeah, Vampire the Masquerade Necromancer bloodlines. This is one of them. So, no matter whether they knew or not knew about Clan Hekata, which is the V5's tabletop's version of a singular necromancer class conglomeration thing. No matter they knew about it or not, they do exist in game and they are a necromancer bloodline, though I am gonna tell you guys, bit weird this one. I honestly I don't mind them, but they're very like insular. At no point are you gonna be playing these probably. For one thing, they're only in Africa and they kind of stopped being a thing in the Dark Ages. So they're still sort of thing, but they're a different thing now. So modern games are a lot more common than just Dark Ages games. Just saying. So then, Impundulu comes from a singular person that was not a vampire and was not connected to vampires in any way. Impundulu was a powerful necromancer in life, married to an equally powerful life witch named Bomkazi. One day, he summoned a spirit that he couldn't quite overpower or control, and the spirit outright murdered him. His wife, Bomkazi, mourned him and buried him, and then during the night, he came back as an undead vampire. Spontaneous vampirism! Yay! World of Darkness things! Honestly, a lot more people can just take lore from this and start putting spontaneous vampirism into their games because it obviously happens. He suggested to his wife to become a vampire herself to kind of not be super alive anymore so that they can have a nice forever togetherness. But she said no. She said that we must now be as sun and moon. She is life and he's death, and they're gonna coexist together and live in harmony. Now, they did just that, but over time, this woman, she really desired children. And obviously, it's a bit hard to conceive with a dead husband. But she didn't want to leave him for another man either. So she worked her life magic, he worked his death magic, and they made them magical baby. And magical baby was born what is effectively a revenant. A revenant it normally happens when this is now explaining birds and bees, but in a very different context. So, if a vampire feeds a mortal their blood without killing the mortal, instead of having a vampire and Vampire the Masquerade, you're gonna have a ghoul or a mortal that has a tiny, teeny smidge of vampiric powers. is addicted to vampire blood, kind of needs it every month, really. And they will obey their master pretty much unquestionably because they will be super into their own master. Some clans, namely clans like Tzimitzi, have figured out that through breeding, they can make ghouls that don't even require being ghouled. Like, it's ghoul cubed, which is a revenant. So when two ghouls tend to have a baby with some extra ritual stuff involved, normally it's not just two ghouls having a baby. What you will end up is somebody that's born with a bit of vampire powers. And this becomes a genetic thing that gets passed down through the generations, like you would. And normally, then revenants create revenant families that serve a specific vampiric master, out of which they also kind of get ghouled. But it's a bit different here. Bit different here because this magic baby has changed some things for Impundulu. First of all, the magic slightly backfired, and he could only feed from his own family members, and anyone that he made into a vampire could also only feed from his family members. So, Bomkazi's revenant line, in other words. But at the same time, those family members became entirely immune to being blood bonded, so they couldn't become a ghoul. When vampire would feed them their blood, nothing would happen, which means that they all had complete free will. They couldn't be subjugated. So the revenants that happened in this case, they were volunteering for this relationship. Where if Impundulu made another vampire, then that vampire would get paired off with his own family members, and a lifelong relationship would start because these family members also tended to practice life magic. So you would have pairings of vampire and the life magic witch. And these pairings, they kind of went on until the life magic witch would die. Or if they didn't quite get along, then normally the life magic witch would help Impundulu to find another donor. And because they are specializing in life magic, normally an Impundulu would only need one donor to support them because these witches, they could heal themselves. If they were ever disrespected by the vampire of the couple, the vampire would get deprived of sustenance until they apologized and behaved. So the power really wasn't in the necromancer vampire's hands. Now, unfortunately, over time, there was a lot of inbreeding, like you could imagine. When you really are relying on feeding from your children that have that special vampire blood, when you only made one magic baby, you can only dilute it so much until it no longer counts and until it no longer gets passed down. So that family started interbreeding a lot, like really a lot. So they were running into issues of either their family members married outside of family and produced healthy progeny, which wouldn't quite suit Impundulu bloodline's tastes because they no longer were a vampire revenant, they just ended up being normal, regular people again. Or they would continue to make children inside the family and couldn't produce healthy progeny anymore, therefore, the family would begin to die. So, by the Dark Ages, the founder of the Impundulu line no longer let it because while life witches live longer than normal mortals, his wife died. And, well, they eventually do die. And as they eventually do die, he didn't want to continue feeding on his children. His wife was gone, and the strongest bond that he has had to the world has gone, so he chose to starve himself. It is unclear if he starved himself until he perished or whether he went into torpor, which is like a comatose state for a vampire. So there could be like an Impundulu buried beneath the earth in Africa somewhere, but it's kind of up in the air about what happened there. By the Dark Ages, the whole bloodline, they're searching for a way to stop this curse from continuing that they accidentally placed on themselves by, the original couple making a magic baby. So, through necromantic blood sorcery, which is a very metal statement to make, they had managed to free themselves from the need to partake in their family. And as such, that bond ended, and with that bond went the major thing about the bloodline. The freed lineage now calls themselves Ishologu, but others call them Mlavatu. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you go to a page on Mlavatu, what you're gonna find is that Mlavatu are considered to be a bloodline of Cappadocians. Hmm, 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 hmm. So then, that means that either something really funky happened at the start there, or that isn't the right start, or that isn't the information through the ages kind of played the broken telephone. There are assumptions made. There are multiple starts to the same bloodline in Africa. Multiple different kind of vampires get called the same thing. Explanations are many, but here's the thing with World of Darkness, with Vampire the Masquerade, the writers tend to leave such things pretty open ended. So when there is a disagreement over what is the correct lore, the answer is normally yes. All lore is correct, or whichever lore that you pick is correct. You can put in timelines in your game, paradoxes in your game. You can pick one or the other. You can say that one side is lying. It's a long history of vampires. Fucked up shit happened during it. Some of it will be retold correctly, some of it won't. There are mages freely about. Weird shit goes down, yo. So, the answer to which lore is correct is yes. The downside to an Impundulu is obvious. You are tied to a life witch, and in fact, they were derogatorily referred to as a familiar of a witch before, which kind of puts them down a little bit. Now, the downside to Mlavatu, and one of the reasons why they're tied to Cappadocians, is that Mlavatu remain as pale and pallid as corpses no matter how much blood they drink. They cannot ever appear alive as a person. They appear as if they're like really dead. They're not rotting dead like Samedi. They're not disfigured like Nosferatu. They just look like they're devoid of blood, like dead, like corpse, like walking corpse. And unfortunately, because that is how they look, in Africa, it is very easy for any other clan or bloodline to tell them apart. They're kind of discriminated against because they are necromancers. They tend to subjugate spirits. They don't respect their ancestors, though that's kind of questionable a little bit, honestly. Because if you go to Impundulu, well, I suppose that would fit. Impundulu really respected the life witches. They actually helped them cross over when they died. But this wouldn't be the ancestors for majority of Impundulu because Impundulu made vampires from people that weren't their blood related family because life witches, doesn't matter how sick they are, doesn't matter if they're dying, would always refuse vampirism. It's like they knew that it was wrong, they knew that it was a curse, they knew that it went against the laws of nature, so they never took it. So they would normally make people into vampires if they had good knowledge of necromancy, or if they were on the brink of death, had something to achieve, and wanted to continue living. Under those two conditions, they would make people into vampires. So it is possible when it comes to Mlavatu that the perception that they're disrespectful towards their own ancestors and that they're subjugating their own ancestral spirits, that could be right. But here's the thing, if Mlavatu came from Impundulu, one thing that they would definitely not do is ever subjugate the ancestors or anyone inside the bloodline of the life witches, because once again, there was a deep connection and deep respect between those two right there. But Mlavatu, they're necromancers. They have an incredible amount of knowledge on both vampires and necromancy. They like to collect the smarts. They appear to be older than they are, or at the very least, they insinuate that they have been around for a lot longer than other bloodlines in Africa think that they were around for. And think scholarly people with the ability to subjugate spirits and make zombies and things like that. If we go all the way back to pre Dark Ages and Dark Ages and go back to Impundulu, the kind of powers that you can expect to use playing as this bloodline is necromancy, duh, making spirits do your bidding, talking with the dead, raising zombies, that sort of thing. You know, good old fortitude, which is make skin tough, and presence, which is the look at me ability. Like, I am so captivating. You want to continue listening to every single word that I'm saying right now. If you go to Mlavatu, their disciplines are Auspex, which is the ability to see spirits, impressions, auras, that sort of thing. Fortitude, which is make skin tough, and necromancy, which is once again subjugate spirits, raise zombies, talk to the dead, that sort of thing. You know, all of that nice goodness that comes from playing a necromancer. And that's it, really. That is the progression that this bloodline has taken. And according to Wikipedia, it is unknown if they know about Clan Hekata. This means that if you're playing a version 5 game, which is the newest version of Vampire the Masquerade tabletop, you could express a desire to play Mlavatu, that was originally an Impundulu, and say that you have heard of Clan Hekata because for some reason you have decided to travel to probably a different continent than Africa because they don't actually know how well Hecata is known in Africa? That is the big question. And you could say that you joined Clan Hecata when it was being created because, necromancer family reunion and all that goodness that has been discussed in the video talking about Hecata specifically. So there is an open ended interpretation there. You could technically play somebody with this background, but considering that they don't technically exist in version 5, there's that one big necromancer clan. A lot of flavor to playing all of this would be entirely lost. And considering that Impundulu were left all the way in the Dark Ages, that flavor has gone a long time ago. It has curdled, it has soured, it has left the building to never be seen again, which is unfortunate because the idea of a vampire that has to be intertwined with a living person to continue existing, partaking in sustenance, and having to actually have respect for that person. That person having their own agency, not just being a servant to a vampire. I think that is such a unique concept and such a unique way of playing a vampire inside Vampire the Masquerade, especially considering that you could a have a buddy that's playing your other side, which would be playing a life witch, which is an entirely different thing, which means that the dynamic that you could bring to a table is a lot wider, or your other side could be played by the storyteller, but then you have the dynamic of other vampires are presumably looking down on you for being so dependent on like this one specific person, and this one specific person not even like being a servant of yours, not being dependent on you, but having to do this through their own free will. And therefore this exchange, it's a dynamic that functions entirely differently from how vampires are used to existing within the mortal world. Like normally vampires will have a herd, blood dolls, people that will volunteer their blood, and that will not necessarily be entirely voluntary. Oftentimes, that will include mind games and mind washing and ghouling somebody and making them like you. Impundulu didn't have that option. It had to be voluntary, which is why it's so interesting to see this dynamic, but eh, that whole clan got sunsetted all the way in the Dark Ages to never be seen again. I wonder how many people have even heard about it. Have you heard about it? Are you like a Vampire the Masquerade lore buff? Do you like really enjoy the setting? Because I really enjoyed the setting, hence why I make these videos. Would you consider playing something like this? I know that in the previous video I said that I don't really want to play cultures that I'm unfamiliar with, but I wish that I could take like that specific dependency, especially dependency on someone else that is quite powerful, but it's not even the same kind of supernatural as you, and like just bring that into a game somewhere because that sounds fun. It sounds like a fun thing to do, and that's what tabletops should be about. They should be about, challenging yourself to have some fun. Little bit of roleplay. All that good stuff. I hope that I explained Impundulu well. If I haven't, there will be a link in the description down below that will take you to a White Wolf, which is the original owner of Vampire the Masquerade IP Wikipedia, that will have everything about this bloodline written down. If you're still here and still watching these videos, thank you so much. And thank you so much for my Patreon supporters that allow me to make videos such as these. I hope that I'm gonna see you for the rest of the Necromancer bloodlines inside Vampire the Masquerade series. That name is a bit of a mouthful, kind of hard to say, but not no worries, Mirta will get used to it. So, thank you for watching. I hope I'm gonna see you the next time. Bye, B.